So we talk about the brain. This is the image that most people have. It's this like squished up, foldy, noodly looking part. It looks like pasta. And so we're going to talk about this part of the brain and what it does and how that helps us control our behavior. So it looks like flesh or whatever it looks like here, but actually the brain is composed of just masses and masses of the neurons we talked about. We looked at you can see when nerves are made out of neurons, but also the brain is actually just made out of masses and masses of neurons. Also, amongst the neuron is what we call the glial cells. These are just additional cells that help protect, nourish, and feed and connect the neurons in the brain. So that's the other thing that's in the brain. There's no blood cells in there. There's no nerves. So you might have seen movies where people do open brain surgery and they could poke the brain and touch it and stimulate it. The person could be even awake and they would still feel no pain because there's no nerve endings in the brain. No blood comes out of here, only around the skull and the scalp. There's 4 parts of the brain: the frontal lobes in the front, parietal lobes on the side, occipital lobes in the back, and temporal lobes also on the side, on different parts of the side. And based here, each slice of these is what we call a cortex. That layer of the brain controls either two things: the motor cortex, which is around here, the sensory cortex, which is a strip right behind it, and there's also association areas all around, all around that. We're going to talk about the individual functions soon enough. So here's another angle from the side of our head looking at the brain mass. And you can see that I try to remember the brain that looks like your left hand if you put your hand like that. This is like the little mitten that comes out here, and the other side goes the other way around. So here we have the frontal lobes again. It's in the front. You have one on each side. The parietal lobe is right here. The temporal lobe is right here, right by your ear. Incidentally, that's part of the cortex that deals with listening and auditory functions is right here. And the occipital lobe is in the back. We've talked about the frontal lobe before when we talked about the story of Phineas Gage, where the person with the tampering iron that just shoots through the brain, that goes like right through there, destroys the frontal lobes. So based on like things like that, like case studies, lesions, tumors and such, we have a good idea of what each of these lobes does. Another way we could know what these lobes do is like we have stimulate them in animals and humans during brain surgery and see what they do. So you could actually just stick like a little needle that gives an electrical impulse to parts of the brain and then stimulate them and see what the person reports feeling or experiencing. And so from case studies, we know the frontal lobe has something to do with imagining consequences, organizing your goals, controlling your emotions. So when Phineas Gage, for example, lost part of the frontal lobe, he became very driftless. He used to be a very thoughtful, reliable person. Suddenly he can't seem to make plans anymore. He can't make long-term goals, and he just did a lot of short-term pleasurable things like drinking and loose sex, so on and so forth. And he also got angry really easily, right? So he can't control his anger or his emotions. And so that's what we think the frontal lobe does. Okay. Also in the back of the frontal lobe is the motor cortex right here at the edge of it. It's just basically a slice of it. So we have it. And we're going to talk about that more later. Okay, right behind it is the parietal lobe. Parietal means somewhere in the back, actually, like in the middle and back. And up here in the front strip is what we call the sensory cortex. And that part controls our senses. We'll talk about that more later. Occipital lobe is the back of the head. And that actually controls your visual cortex, which is the part of the brain that deals with looking and processing visual information. Which is ironic because your eyes are up here front, and this is physically the farthest away part of your brain that could be dealing with it. And that's what, so if you have like an injury right here, if someone hits you in the back of the head, it's actually possible to go blind without harming your eyes. Similarly, in the temporal lobe here on the side is where your auditory cortex is. It processes your hearing information and your processing of hearing thoughts. And so, again, if someone damages the side of your brain, you could actually lose your ability to hear or ability to process auditory information.